Hello everyone, and welcome to the Universidad Camilo Cela. Welcome also to this event regarding Rethinking Higher Education for Equity and Opportunity, a book talk with Mrs. Nieves Segovia and Mr. Paul LeBlanc, which is part of the Global Education Week. My name is Zainab, and today we're very pleased and honored to welcome you, Mr. Paul LeBlanc, the president of Southern New Hampshire University, as well as Mrs. Nieves Segovia, the president of her own university, as well as the SEK group. Welcome to both of you. UCJC and SNHU have collaborated and continue to collaborate in a variety of different projects. One of them considering the joint program in the education and vulnerable contexts. And today's event is a conversation between Mrs. Segovia and Mr. Paul about equity and opportunity in the third level education. As you know, the main events of the third act of the Global Education Forum took place last week. But let's take a look at how the forum started. The idea came about in the think tank, which took place in April 2020, regarding the challenges and consequences and results of the pandemic on education in general. We'll also look at the other events leading up to it.
In recent years, we have witnessed the beginning of a profound debate on the role of the university and its need to change, evolve, and adapt to the new social and professional reality we are living. The appearance of COVID in March 2020 was the definitive push for this reflection to be even broader, deeper, more sincere, and necessary. A few weeks after the beginning of the pandemic, in April 2020, the Camilo José Cela University launched the think tank Future and Learning. Its objective was to analyse the impact of the pandemic on higher education, to reflect on the challenges and opportunities of higher education in the face of the current paradigm shift, and to build a community of innovators to openly discuss the future of higher education. For 16 months, more than 100 university rectors and vice-rectors, entrepreneurs, students, professors, and other professionals from the formal and non-formal education sector have held one of the deepest and most current conversations on the future of higher education. The conclusions to all these conversations are summarized in what we call the Global Manifesto, 12 points of discussion for the university of the third millennium. In June 2021, UCJC went a step further and decided to broaden the debate, launching a new edition of the Global Education Forum, a platform created in 2010 by the SEK Education Group that held a similar discussion on school education in its first two editions. In this third edition, the Global Education Forum aims to continue the discussions initiated in the think tank. Over the next 3 days, more than 120 experts and students from all over the world will discuss the challenges that the university system and higher education are facing. But this doesn't start today. In the last few weeks, we have started this debate with different micro-events around the 4 event tracks: entrepreneurship, well-being, social impact, and digitalization. We also started an international campaign asking the educational community to share their views on the future of higher education. More than 100 people have sent us videos with insights. In addition, more than 1,000 students from all around the world have spent several weeks working and contributing ideas on what the university they want to study at should be like. Today, we continue this debate. Welcome to the Global Education Forum Third Act, the forum that aims to co-create the future of higher education.
Now we'll have a closer look at the manifesto. These are the 12 conclusive points of which the Global Education Forum is based on.
We believe in a university for the third millennium that's learner-centric, collaborative, open and accessible, data-driven and personal. A companion for lifelong learning, with a nomad campus that offers modeless educational experiences. A university that's responsive to the new learning needs of the future of work and assumes new teaching and learning roles. A university with a sandbox spirit that focuses on the well-being of its community and is socially committed. We believe in a free-thinking and critical university. This is our global manifesto. What do you think? Please join the conversation.
Has been a great success, and there have been many interesting conclusions that have been drawn from it. And it is no doubt that a variety of different people have put time and effort into making this forum enjoyable and very, very much reflexive. So let's take a look at the making of video. Paul LeBlanc was one of the main speakers last week, where he closed Friday's event with a plenary talk about the future of higher education. So, Mr. LeBlanc, thank you so much for being here and having to come all the way from New Hampshire in the east coast of the United States and giving us a talk. Mr. LeBlanc has been president of the SNHU for 17 years, and in that time, the university has grown from less than 3,000 students to over 170,000 students, and it is the largest nonprofit education provider in the United States. He has also written a book called Students First: Equity, Access, and Opportunity in Higher Education, which was published just last month. So it is very exciting and enriching to have an opportunity to discuss everything about his expertise and knowledge on the subject. Mrs. Nieves, would you please do us the honor of commencing the conversation?
Thank you very much, Zainab, and welcome, welcome home, Paul. I am just delighted to have you here. This is home, and you're part of the family, so it all feels right.
It's so nice to be here. I've admired the work you do for so long. This has been just a treat to finally be here and be with students.
Yes, that's what he was looking into. So there are too many adults maybe around, but they all wanted to listen.
We'll be with everyone, but students for sure.
Yeah, we can do with them. So thank you very much, and congratulations to SNU for winning our hackathon. Yeah. There were many universities in it, and because we wanted to hear, of course, the voice of students, the same as you always do, and that's the reason for this book. I have a pleasure to have, because it just came out students first, and I think it encapsulates, just the name of it encapsulates so nicely what you think, what you are, who you are, and what you've done. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the keynote you shared with us, and we're ready for to have a conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So first thing, and before we move on into the book, I'd like to ask about your personal journey, Paul. I mean, we always talk about SNU and how it's grown, 3,000 students, 170,000, etc. But what's been your personal journey in terms of, and what have you learned?
My family immigrated, and I immigrated into the United States when I was a child, and my parents had only 8th grade educations, so they came from a very, very poor farming village. I was the first in my family to go to university, and it changed my life, and it made the lives of my daughters, I have 2 daughters, so dramatically different than what their grandparents could have imagined. And in the United States, we often refer to the American dream. The American dream is you could come from anywhere, start from anywhere, and have opportunity to sort of transform and have social mobility and create opportunity. And in the United States, that dream is less and less available to young people. So if you are a new immigrant to the United States who comes from a similar background, you probably struggle incredibly. And we have a very different funding model. So as you know, Nieves, students take on a lot of debt. In fact, in the United States now, it's $1.6 trillion of debt for all student loans. So we see people increasingly not coming. So for me, the work we do around innovation is to try to make education available to this next generation of learners the way it was available to me. And at the heart of it, I fear that American higher education is broken. It's more about itself than it is about students. That's the title of my book, Students First. And I don't think it's attuned to the way your generation of learners is coming into the world. You face enormous challenges that we are leaving with, climate change, for example, but you're also the first generation of digital natives, so you've only ever known technology. We are of a generation that thinks about going online. I tend to think of students as never offline. You live in both worlds simultaneously. And we have spent a lot of time with learners, and one of the themes I was sharing it this morning in an interview was, we often hear, I love learning, I just hate school. And I don't know how many of you can't say that right by because of who's here. But I wonder, you know, can we give learners models that are not only creating opportunity for them, but can we do it in a way that makes learning much more exciting and relevant and attuned to the challenges that students will face in the future? So that led to the writing of this book, actually.
Well, congratulations. I love listening to you because of the provocations. Because you say these things, which are, and you're totally right about all of them. You know, I share all of your insights. And when you say that it's time that we put the students first and not the institutions, which I think that just is absolutely 180 kind of move or shift into this learner-centric, personal university type of model.
Yeah.
How far do you think we are from it? And is this also talking to us about our own sense of purpose as higher education institutions?
So I don't know, I meet almost nobody in higher education who doesn't care about students. They care about students. But our systems are built to reward other things. We reward scholarship, we reward publishing books, we reward, there's very little in the US system at least that rewards people for the way we treat students and the time we spend with them. So start with that. Secondly, we have built our institutions in a one-size-fits-all model. So if you're a student on my campus and you are an education major, you're going to have an experience very much like everybody else who's an education major at the same time. So we don't do anything that's really personalized. We don't think about, what does this particular student know when they come to us? What are the things that they carry with them? What are the burdens they carry with them? We, for example, we have a very big sort of focus on advising. And this year we did trauma-informed advising, because what we realized is that many of our students were coming with mental health issues, that the pandemic had exerted a very heavy cost. If you were poor and black in America, you suffered an even heavier cost. So we really felt like we needed advisors who are much more attuned to listening to where that trauma sits and how they might sort of do a better job of this. But I think, you know, I love your manifesto because you talked about being student-centered. And I think we are far from that, actually. For example, our schedule, our offices are open from 8 to 4. It's as if we never met an 18-year-old. Right? It's like, when do you all sort of come alive? For many of our students, you know, 8 o'clock classes make no sense whatsoever. And there's research that backs this up, by the way. There's research about sleep patterns and adolescence, et cetera. So, and I think about time a lot, because I think we fix time. You have to be in a certain classroom at a certain time of day. And for our poorest students that we serve, time is really a privilege that they don't have. So we're really trying to think about non-time-based programs, allow students to set their own pace. We don't believe in exams. We use them all the time, so we're not there yet. But I'm not a big believer in exams. In a world of ubiquitous search with Google, why am I asking you to memorize anything? Why aren't I instead teaching you to think critically? And why aren't I getting you hands-on? And I mean, many of the principles that your father talked about, Nieves, when he helped sort of create this amazing place, are really about experiential learning. It's about making the learning relevant. We talk a lot about rigorous, and I think a lot of what counts as rigorous learning is more like rigor mortis. It makes you want to die, right? I would rather have vigorous. I would like you to be excited about your learning, right? To come into the learning. And I have a favorite educator in the United States, a guy named Dennis Litke, and he started a new college that's very experientially based. So everyone works on projects. You know what the interesting thing is? After graduation, 75% of his graduates keep working on their projects. Why? Because he starts with their passions. They don't want to give it up, right? So we have a long way to go.
Oh, I'm definitely for it. The passion-driven curriculum that's personal, etc. Just everything resonates. You've even gone talking about grades as far as saying that it's an immoral kind of exercise of power, grading. And yeah, we need those provocations, I think. We need to wake up.
Yeah, I mean, a grade is an extrinsic value or reward. It means that someone else is going to sit and cast judgment on your learning. I'm going to sit back and say, oh, I think you are at this point. And there are a couple problems with that. So one, I would much rather you be intrinsically motivated. I want your motivation to come from within, not because someone's going to cast judgment. Secondly, we know the research tells us two things, at least in America. Rampant grade inflation. A's are common now, so grades don't really matter very much in the same way. Secondly, if you look at the typical American university term, it's 14 or 15 weeks. What the research tells us, if you simply go about 2 to 3 more weeks, everybody moves to the right of the grade curve. So why does that 15-week point matter? It's a snapshot in time and it's arbitrary. So I would love to challenge the idea of grades. And I do think that in some ways grades are an artifact of power. And students are not very much empowered by them.
It's immoral, which I agree.
Yeah, I think they're rather immoral.
Totally agree. Actually, we just heard that during the Global Education Forum, we heard over 1,000 student voices, and this is some of the things they said. I wrote them down. They asked for universities as practical knowledge hubs, for self-reflection and self-development opportunities that they're not getting, they're not always getting. They also look for self-directed learning experiences, so they maybe need less of us in some spaces and more of us in others. They feel, as you mentioned, they need to be re-empowered. And I will focus on this, and they are unhappy about this siloed structure, which is, of course, across disciplines, stages, even regions, whether it's global or global education or not, and schedules, of course. So how can we serve them better? Of course, by changing a structure that's so rigid and static and it's been there forever, so we don't challenge it always.
Right.
You've heard students, you actually respond to them. What are the major challenges you found in trying to break down with the walls? And of course, we try to make them always lower and lower, put them down.
So they're challenges of our own making in large measure, right? So the idea of the silos of your major, choosing what you're going to do, is a reflection of how the academy has organized knowledge. And what we know, of course, is that the most interesting work happens at the boundaries of knowledge, when things clash together. So when mechanical engineering and biology come together, you get exciting breakthroughs. You don't get them when you sit not the same kind of breakthroughs when you sit only in your silos. So I think we have to, Michael Crow at Arizona State University has done really interesting work in combining disciplines so that a student can work on a problem instead of a discipline. So if you said, I don't know what I want to major in, but I sure as hell want to do something about climate change, can we build a curriculum for you that takes from everything that has to, so there's environmental science, there's policy classes, et cetera. It's not a major, it's a problem. Bucknell University in the US has done some interesting work similarly, where you choose sort of problems that you want to solve for. And you know, that allows you to follow your passion, your interest, and it allows us to think differently. So the silos are hard, and the silos also come because of we are a regulated industry. So I had an interview with a reporter this morning, and I was saying to her that journalism changed overnight. It was disrupted. Music changed overnight. MP3s and just changed the whole world of music. They changed overnight. Healthcare and education is regulated. We don't change so quickly. So our government regulators, our accreditors, all of that will fight to sort of keep things the same, but it doesn't serve students.
Of course, that's probably one of the reasons why we have such thick walls to against disruption that we see all over the place. But you worked
and it's
a
also
lot.
culturally, right? It's a way of thinking about the world. And like all of us, we tend to use our own experiences as our reference points. So this is my college experience, thus it must be good for you guys. That was 100 years ago. Like, why would I think my college experience would be good for you guys, right? It needs to be something that's really attuned. And it, of course, has to be quality, but we have to think about quality differently. And here's what I know. There is no exam you're taking that ensures the quality of your learning. All I know is that you're cramming for an exam for 48 hours before the exam. And you're memorizing, in many instances, what you could search for quickly on an app. So let's think about assessment differently. Let's think about how you demonstrate your learning differently.
Absolutely. Don't you think that sometimes that regulation is a big excuse for us to it's like that would really, from within the walls, we try to thicken them in a way that we're not affected by this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think whenever my folks want to resist change, they will tell me that there is a regulation that we can't, right? Like they'll waive the regulation. Yeah, so we're guilty. I probably do it too sometimes when I don't want to change something. But yeah, for sure.
And you worked a lot with Clayton Christensen.
Yeah.
And I wish I had met him. It's one of those people I wish I had. Disrupting Class for Me was one of those books that helped me start thinking differently about the opportunities ahead of the whole learning scenario we had. Biggest takeaways? I mean, how was that? I mean, tell me, how do you see disruption, even if we're saying that it's out of our thick walls? But how do you see it penetrating, kind of? What did Clayton say? Clay say years ago?
So I don't know if all your students know who he was. So Clay Christensen, you all know?
I don't know. You can maybe.
So Clay Christensen was a very famous Harvard Business School professor. He was a friend of mine for 40 years. We actually met when we were very young. We met playing basketball. Oh. But and before he was famous. But he later went on to become famous. And he really did an important body of research around this idea of disruptive innovation. So innovation that comes and changes a whole world. So the MP3 would be a disruptive innovation. Before you had to buy albums and then CDs, or tapes and then CDs, but now all of a sudden you could stream music digitally, and then you could steal music, and then you could share music differently. So it just changed the whole economics of that world. And Clay talks to the difference between sustaining innovation, so that is all the things that you can do to innovate to make what you do better, higher quality, more engaging, but it doesn't really change the rules of the game. It takes the thing you do it the same way, but better, versus disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation says, I don't want to just do it better, I actually want to do it differently. I want to reinvent the game. So higher education is difficult because it's regulated. So the rules of the game are set by other people. So it's a little bit harder, and you have to sort of think about it differently. But what Clay would say is, well, one of the things you can do is create innovations for people who are not playing the game now, for new audiences, someone who you don't serve. So for us, we do work with homeless kids in Los Angeles. We do work with refugee populations. As Ava knows, she helps us. We do work with refugee populations and refugee camps in Africa and the Middle East. These are populations that weren't getting education. So they were willing to entertain models that looked very different, that didn't look like traditional classrooms. And that was a place that allowed us to try these things and give them something they very much need, and also reinvent education. So I'll tell you one of my most inspiring learning opportunities. It was on a playground in South Central LA. So South Central LA is famous for its high murder rate and its gangs. It's a really tough, difficult, dangerous neighborhood. And these homeless kids that we work with were sitting with a teacher on a playground, on a basketball court. And she was teaching them scientific methodology. I was like, how is she going to do this? We're not in a classroom. They don't have any lab equipment. But she had a bag of Cheetos and a Bic lighter. Do y'all know what a Bic lighter is? Right, right. So she had them, she had a form and clipboards, and they had to say to burn Cheetos. You know what Cheeto is? It's a really bad junk food. All right. I was like, maybe it's just an American thing. But they were burning these things and observing what changed, like what changes in the composition, what changes in the smell, how does the texture feel different? Because at the heart of all good science, you begin with observational skills, right? And you try and you monitor and then you try something different. So I thought in that moment, and these students were just like engaged. They were like heads down, huddling. They were stealing Cheetos once in a while. But in that moment, I thought this is just pure teaching. And it doesn't require a lot of technology. It didn't require, but it was someone who was willing to think differently about it. It wasn't just her method. She had fewer methods available. She was actually teaching them competencies. She wasn't asking to memorize the third law of thermodynamics. She was saying, what happens when you actually put heat to a substance? What happens to the molecules? And they were learning by doing. And I think that's just wonderful examples. And Clay would love that, right? Clay would say, and these kids weren't otherwise getting an education, changing the rules of how they learn. We use competencies, so nothing was time-based. These kids don't, if you tell the homeless kids they have to be in a classroom at a certain time, that's impossible. They may be looking for food that day, right? They may be moving to another shelter that day, if they have a shelter. So taking the time out of the equation is what worked. And I see this in the refugee camps. When I've visited our refugee camp students, it can take 4 to 5 hours simply to get water. So we can't ask them to connect to a time, but we can connect them to real learning. So I just think Clay would love this, but he would say, one other thing I will say and I'll stop, but he would say, no, there's disruptive innovation, but there's also another question you need to ask, which is, what is the job that someone wants you to do for them when they come? When you come to this university, what is the job you want to be done for you? It's like, what do you mean the job? He would say that everyone, when they spend their money and their time, whether it's a car or a service or a piece of clothing or an education, is looking to get a job done. So if I'm buying a car, the theoretical job is I want to go from A to B, right? It's transportation. If I buy a Mercedes, I have another job probably. And that job might be I want to say to the world, I've made it. I've got status. I'm successful. It does another job for me. If you buy a BMW, probably the same job and say, oh no, but I like the engineering. I just drove through the streets of Madrid. You never drive a BMW the way you could drive, right? There's no driving fast or handling, right? But it's a beautiful car, and it does other things for you. So the question in education in America, especially with our campuses, are two jobs. So one is, I need a degree that's going to help me have a good career. Like I just want to know that I'm going to be successful in my life. I want a good career. But there's another job, Clay would say. He would say there's a job that we would call coming of age. I also want to grow up. I want to find out who I am as a human being. I want to know if I have a calling. I hope I have a calling. Maybe I come with it. Maybe I need to discover it. I need to know what matters to me. What kind of impact do I want in life? I want to get away from my parents. That's another job. I want to get out from under their roof. I want to be in a community of friends. So when we think about our campus, we separate those jobs now. So we increasingly allow students to live on campus and have that coming of age job, which is clubs and sports and study abroad and living in the dorm, hanging out, sports, et cetera. And then we increasingly want to say, how would you like your academic job to be done? Do you want to do it in traditional classrooms? Do you want to do it in a combination of online and traditional classrooms? Do you want to do it by going out in the world and working and getting credits for that work? And we're trying to be, and the word we use all the time now is fluid. We want fluidity. We want to be able to allow students to mix and match what's best for them. Because we don't usually, when you think about the admissions process, and I don't know what it looks like here, but in America, there isn't a real lot of attention to who you are as an individual, right? You apply to a university, any university, and it's them saying you are worthy. We will accept you. And really we want to flip that and say, will you accept us? Can we give you what you need?
can go on. I mean, like,
Sorry, I
I'm
feel
thrilled.
I feel like I'm prattling on.
no,
Forgive me.
I'm thrilled to be listening to you, and I hope everyone is listening very intently. Of course, you talk about fluidity, and as students were saying, we don't want that siloed structure. So literally just answering to their needs and
Everything they said,
yeah,
right?
it's just but they're always right. I mean, they're always right when they say what they need. I mean, we all know what we need. So. You mentioned talking about Clay Christensen and going to answer to learners who are not being served, so the etc. You also work with audiences of learners who are in their adult learners.
Yeah.
That really connects with lifelong learning, but in different ways. Tell us a little about all that work you're doing with. Not the age group 18, 22, or 24,
right.
but rather 24 to 100.
Yeah.
And it's one of the topics we discussed during the forum. So,
so here's what we know. You are still in this transition period, all of you who are students, in an old industrial model of education. And the idea was you come out of high school, you go to university, and then you start your career for the rest of your life, and you're good. And of course, that is no longer true. So whatever your first job is, any of your jobs of the future, those skills are going to transform at a faster and faster pace. So now we often say that the skills you learn today will be out of date within 3 to 5 years. So you will have to be lifelong learners, and you will go in and out of learning all of your career. And it could look very different. If you are a programmer or a computer scientist, it may be, I just need 2 days on a new subroutine in Python. If you are a physician, it may be, I need a month on a new robotic surgical technique that I need to master. And you could do this with any profession you can imagine. So now we want to think about not universities as a place you go to for a short amount of fixed time. 4 years is short. I know it doesn't feel that way maybe at the moment. But as a learning ecosystem that you go in and out of all of your career. And you're going to have to all be lifelong learners. That just sort of comes with the territory today. And we work with lots of adults. So we work with big companies like Amazon, Walmart, big healthcare companies. We just signed an agreement with HCL, which is a large Indian-based tech company that's moving into North America. And what they're really thinking a lot about now is not degrees. They want us to create systems of micro-degrees or micro-credentials that allow people to retrain, reskill, move into better jobs. And there's even some question about what the value of a degree will be. Now, I still believe that degrees continue to be very valuable, but I don't think that they're the only credential that matters. So for a lot of poor communities, it may be that 4 years of university is just not within reach. It's a privilege they can't afford. But we're working, for example, with Amazon, and in just 9 months, we can do a coding boot camp that gets people a software engineering credential and a first job at $75,000 a year. That's not a bad first salary, right? And they've done that with 9 months of education. Now, they will need to keep learning, keep building, and keep moving towards a degree over time. But I'm really fascinated with what we call earn while you learn models.
Absolutely.
Right?
And more workplace degrees. Do you think we're transitioning into that? That could be part of our whole purpose for the future? You feel that now that knowledge is no longer in this traditional classrooms for 4 years, etc., that it's everywhere and that we're all learning and we're all teaching, hopefully. Do you see there's a place like that could be the new place for higher education institutions once we really are able to
so I think
jump the sick walls and ourselves go out of them?
I think we need to be, and I think that's the struggle. But of course, part of what's happening is, I often say that what's happening in higher education, at least in America, but I think globally, is that we're going through a version of climate change. Everything's changing, we're in the middle of it, so it's hard to know. But part of what will happen is that there will be new players. So Google, for example, has a program called Grow with Google. It's free to anybody who wants it. You earn these credentials, and they work with now hundreds of employers who say, we'll accept that Google credential as part of a sort of accepted in our job interview process. And that's just one example. Salesforce, so it's happening in technology first, where there's huge demand, but it will happen in healthcare and other areas as well.
That looks like disruption.
Oh, it is disruption.
It looks like disruption for us, even if we don't want to call it that way, but it's literally around the corner.
Yeah, and the question will be, can universities change fast enough, or will other providers come in and start to meet that need? And then the other interesting aspect that some people have predicted is that employers will actually be the accreditors of the future. because it will be the employer who says,
This-
oh, wait a minute, you get your degree from this place? Yeah, we love what they do. Their graduates know how to do the work we need them to do. We work with we just started working with a large healthcare system. So 250,000 employees, 54 hospitals, hundreds of clinics. And here, think about this for a moment. We have nursing programs in America are very elaborate, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of clinicals, et cetera, et cetera. When they hire new nurses, they can't put them to work yet because
they
they're
need
not
to
ready to
retrain
work
them.
in the real world. And then they do an additional weeks and months of training before they let them loose in the hospitals.
That's
We've-
making sense.
That tells us that university training is no longer relevant. It's not working, and we have to rethink it.
Well, relevance is another one of those big topics that we discussed last week. I mean, what do we
Yeah.
need to do to stay relevant and to
Stay
lead?
relevant.
Not just stay relevant, but try to lead.
Yeah,
the
and with this
future
hospital,
work.
for example, we are reimagining nursing to be competency and skills-based.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than thinking because you put in 2,500 hours, you must be good, it's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
actually, we don't care how many hours. As soon as you can demonstrate that you can do the work, we let you go to the next thing you need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really real learning versus time, mastery versus time.
And I don't, unfortunately, we don't have the time, but I'd love to talk about your competency model,
Yeah.
competency-based model, which is also like an absolute, game changer to
We think
the
it's the
way
most
we think of-
important thing. So, and at least in American higher education, but I think globally, we actually, we're very, very good at measuring how long someone sat at a desk. We say, 15 weeks, 3 hours a week. We know how much time you've spent. We know the grades don't tell us very much. They're not very reliable. And what we don't actually measure is student learning. What does someone actually know what to do with
How to
what
do
they
it.
know? And it's not doing instead of knowing, it's doing with knowing. What can you do with what you've learned along the way? So we've been designing programs, competency-based programs or skills-based programs that actually allow students to go as fast, as slow as they need to based on their ability to show mastery of the learning. So in some ways, it's harder because now I could cram for an exam, maybe not do a lot of work, get a decent grade, I move on. I've got a grade that doesn't mean very much, and I don't know, no one knows if I actually know how to do anything. In our model, you actually have to demonstrate what you can do before you can move on.
It's harder for both, for the student and for the institution, and that's where I suppose you find the
That's right,
resistance
because in this
sometimes, and-
model, assessment's really hard.
Yeah, of course.
You've got to really be thoughtful about how you assess learning in this model.
Absolutely. So I don't know how we are with time, probably bad, and you might have questions because actually it was a discussion and I could go on and on, as you know, Paul, forever, listening to you. So I don't know if we have some questions from any students or, yes?
I knew you were going to ask the first question. I could just tell.
You knew.
Yeah, no, you were nodding a lot. So go ahead, first question.
I was very invested, yeah. So one concern that students raised during the thanks. One concern that students raised during the Global Education Forum was to community service or pro bono activities be integrated into the curriculum. So in what way would it be beneficial to students or other stakeholders to include this in the curriculum?
I don't know why we would not include it in the curriculum. We know it's a better way of learning in so many ways. So the phrase we would use in America is service learning. And it's often a course that has a component that has you out doing kind of volunteer work. I would argue for a more robust version of that. Here's what we know. There's a lot of research on what we call high impact practices. So high impact practices are what are the things we can do in learning that will have the greatest impact on students. If you think about all the ways you learn, volunteering, doing service, leading organizations, study abroad, project-based learning, all the research shows that that's much more powerful in the classroom. Like if you think about when we research and do surveys of students and ask, where's the most powerful things that happened to you in your 4 years? It's rarely the classroom. It's often the faculty member, by the way, but it's the faculty member in the conversations that happen outside the classroom. This faculty member helped me do this project, this work, et cetera, and they were really important to me. They changed my life. So it's not the importance of faculty, but it's how we use faculty and what kinds of work we ask you to do. So in my perfect world, you would be doing mostly service learning. You would be out in the world learning all the time. Remember I mentioned this guy, Dennis Litke, who's one of my favorite educators. He's crazy. I could tell you stories about Dennis, but I think he's one of the most He has my favorite high school in America. It's a high school he created. In that high school, students have almost no classes. There are, I think, 100 vans. And they come in, they check in with their advisor, they maybe do some stuff they need to do, and then they get in the van and they go to a place to actually learn. So the first student I met there was this amazing young woman. She was African American. She came from a very poor neighborhood. And Dennis said to the state of Rhode Island, if you let me change the rules, remember the regulators? He said, if you let me play by different rules, I will build a school where no one will go, and I will take the kids no one wants. And that's the school he built. It's in a crack neighborhood, right? Which is like graffiti, it's tough. And the school is beautiful, and the neighborhood protects it because they know they have something special, because he respects them. And then the student I talked to, I said, so how did you come here? And she said, I was kicked out of my other high schools. I said, more than one? She said, yeah, 3. This was my last chance. And I said, what did you like about it? And she said, nothing. Like, I didn't want to be here. I hate school. And I said, well, tell me, like, you love it now? Like, what happened? And she said, well, they asked me, and this is Dennis's brilliance, they asked me, what do you like? And she said, nothing, thinking they were thinking about, like, is it math or is it, somewhat literature? And I said, no, what do you like out of school? And she said, I love fish. I have a saltwater aquarium. And she talked about it with passion. I said, okay. So she came back the next week, and they said, we found they don't call them internships. They call them work learning sites or something. We found yours, the Woods Hole Research Center. Do you know the Woods Hole Research Center? In America, it is the preeminent oceanographic research center, and it's a short drive away from where the school is based. She thought she died and went to heaven. She was surrounded by the things she cared most about in the world, right? And she wasn't a good student, by the way. So they gave her the simplest job. She just had to go around, read the thermometer, check the tank temperature, et cetera, et cetera. But then they said, hey, we need you to test the pH level of the water. She didn't know how to do that. So now she went back to her advisor and said, I need to learn this thing. But think about that. No one was saying to her, you need to learn. She said, I need to learn. So then they set her up with a science teacher. And they talked about this, and she learned the concept. She goes back, and there was more stuff she could do if she knew some more math and calculations she needed to do. So now all of a sudden she's asking about math. And she just lit up, right? She became a great student because they started with the most important question, what do you care about? And then they said, we're going to put you in a learning environment where we trust you to just take off with it. And it's in a remarkable place. And I think that's sort of the ideal. So yeah, if the service you're doing is part of your passion, we should encourage you to do more of it. And then we need to help you say back to us, this is how I'm learning and this is what I'm learning, right? Because we do have a responsibility to make sure you learn. We're an educational institution. But we can work with you to extract the learning. And I think for me, the revelation is that institutions, universities, should have no monopoly on where learning happens. We're one of the places that learning happens. But you didn't stop learning when you left university. I didn't stop learning. I'm learning all the time. Learning happens everywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you. And in very unexpected places sometimes. Learning happens, in very unexpected places.
And also
sure.
with failure, which we don't do a good job of in universities.
No,
we celebrate success, but most of my best learning came when I made a mistake.
Absolutely. Other questions? I'm sure. Someone there? Yeah. Sure. You have the mic.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly congratulate the hackathon winners and thank you for your time. I wanted to, just following on from one of the conclusions drawn from the hackathon, do you think we could adapt the content of programs to be directed towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals?
I think we have to. It is the existential crisis facing all of us. But I'm old, so it's like, I'll get through this, but you have a whole lifetime in a planet that's in deep trouble. So I think the sustainability goals, especially the ones directed at climate, are imperative. And it's critical that organizations and institutions equip you to deal with this. I think, but to equip you to deal with this is not simply about recycling practices, right? It's about the failure of late-stage capitalism. It's about wealth inequity. It's about the structural aspects of racism that keep communities down. It's about consumer cultures and marketing that prompts you to keep throwing away things and buying new things. I hope this is not inappropriate to say, I'm not very Catholic, though I grew up Catholic. But I have to say, Pope Francis just issued something this week, which was an astounding demand for our world to sort of address the sort of shortcomings of capitalism and consumer culture that sort of sees the planet as an inexhaustible source of resources that you can just burn up. You can't. So in some ways, if I could wave the wand, I would sort of halt all of our normal educational efforts, say we're going to build this for this crisis that faces us as a species and as a planet.
Sure, I can only agree.
Just that. It's just a small thing. No, we have to do
save the
it.
world. No, we have to, I mean, if we don't save the world, who's going to do this? I mean,
No, my whole faith is in this generation who are thinking differently about the world. I mean,
Yeah,
you are the leaders who will have to sort of lift us through this. But we have to equip you with the tools to do so.
that's our part of the job. The rest is the rest. So, yes.
Nieves, as president of UCJC, how do you think we could further adapt the university for the students of the 21st century?
Well, we have a lot to do, and that's why we actually opened the forum to be advancing this conversation and learning together. Actually, I think, and just listening and learning from President LeBlanc, we have to co-create this with you, with students, and that's why we wanted to hear your voices, because there is no other way for us to get it right than by doing this together. So I think that it was very inspirational, everything we heard, and I would definitely, I mean, I agree with 100%, and you know that there's because I think that right now we are in a place where we have more opportunities than ever to do things.
Can I ask you a question about this? If the program here had looked radically different, so it didn't look like a traditional university, would you have come? Would your parents have said, well, this is the strangest looking university I ever saw, like you're not going to be in class? So I think part of the problem, when I said change is hard because of cultural, it's actually the hardest part is culture. And it's the models we have in our head about what's good and what's not good. And I think, Nieves could lead enormous change and build an option or a program side by side with the traditional that would look very different. But it's a real question about who would come. And those students that I mentioned to you that said, I love learning, but I hate school. Yeah, but if someone else is paying for you and even your own sort of sense of what school looks like. So I think we have maybe our biggest change will be the one that's in our head and our hearts, not the structures of curriculum and schedules, et cetera.
So I think we have to be bold together. Like we all need to step out of a comfort zone where we are. I mean, parents and sometimes students and of course institutions and professors. We're all in a place where we probably need to.
Yeah, we have a program called Inkwell. So these are students who are in game design. They're our most passionate students. I mean, they are like, they don't shower, they work all around, they're like pizza boxes, like, God, you guys, come on, right? But they just love what they do, and they design games, and they design simulations. And what we did is we created a program where they have a sort of pseudo company. So it's not a real company, it's called Inkwell, but they work with real world clients. So they worked with the most famous children's hospital in America, Boston Children's Hospital. People come from around the world to it. And what they said is that our nurses make mistakes quite often in emergency situations with infants, because you and I could get the same dose of a drug, and even though we are different sizes, we would be fine because we're adults. But the wrong size dose for a 2-month-old versus a 6-month-old could be fatal. So they actually built a simulation that actually had a syringe that was connected to a sensor, and the hospital loved this because their nurses could practice over and over and over and over again. And it was very cool because it was like alarm bells going off, and there are avatars going through, and it's chaotic, and the clock is ticking down, and you've got 15 seconds to get this right because the doctor's calling for it. And it worked really well. I asked those students that, so they had to present to the client, they had to write up the specs, they had to do they were checking in, they all had roles, there was quality control, there were people who were doing design work itself, there were people leading the business development, right? And they probably only had about 1/3 of their degree in a traditional classroom. They're mostly just working in a studio that looked like a real business. And I asked them, I said, so what are the things you had to do in classrooms? And they said, well, we had to take our writing. We took a writing class. I said, well, God, you did a ton of writing in this project. Couldn't you have done that? Like, yeah, we could have. I was like, would you have rather? If you had a choice between doing your writing in the context of this business, or in the classroom, like, oh, the business. Like, they wanted no classes. those are the kinds of models we should play with.
And we think we have more opportunities than ever to combine different types of models, because now like space and time and content and the tools we have, etc., make all the possible combinations for us to produce different things from all the traditional classroom model, which is anyway. So we know it's long past. So
And
yeah, it's
I
exciting
don't know
times.
if you guys have been doing very much with virtual reality, but I am so excited about what's possible with
It's
VR.
the next frontier.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's great,
And
great
for
stuff.
health, for example, and definitely. So do we have another question here? Until what time do we have, Christina? Okay, well, go.
The student-first system, which puts students on the center of university, has to be flexible in every way, in format, programs, evaluation methods, etc. Is it really possible to adapt everything to everyone's individual needs?
To adapt it.
Everything to everyone's individual needs.
To make really
I
personal.
don't think we will do that on a student-by-student basis for a while. I think, so in medicine, there's a distinction between personalized medicine and precision medicine. So for a long time, there was all this excitement about, no, like we could study, Ava's gene type, breakthrough in genetics, like we would be able to prescribe very specifically for her. And it's turned out to be very elusive. We really struggle to get to that level of individualization. So now where medicine is going is what's called precision medicine, which is, I may not be able to get Eva exactly right, but I can put her in a category and be much better about her treatments because I'm able to, right? So we're getting much more precise about things. So with breast cancer, for example, we used to treat all breast cancer the same way. It was the same protocols by and large. And now what we know is that, and we can do this with genetics, there are many types of breast cancers, and your responsiveness as a patient will differ. So they can test and say, oh, wait a minute, in the old days we would have given you tamoxifen, I think was the principal drug, but you actually won't respond to that. You would have been one of those patients in the old days like, the treatment's not working. But now we have something we know your genetic type will respond to better. So we're getting better about that. I think we'll do this with students first in education. We may not be able to get an individually curated pathway for you, but we'll be able to say, oh, wait a minute. You are actually one of those students who learn much better if we put you in project-based learning. Maybe you're a visual learner as opposed to a real literate learner. So let's think about the way that learning could happen, and we can start to build options and fluidity for you. And I would go further than that. I would also say, we also want to understand, when do you study best? Like, I don't want to put you in a morning class if your chronotype is late. And do you, what are your sort of financial resources? Do you have things that can we sort of move you into a class where the resources are less expensive? Because in our context, students pay. So I think we will get there over time, but we have a long way to go. But we're working with Google right now on a very ambitious project. It's a 2-year project, millions of dollars, lots of people in both Google and us, to use machine learning and chatbots. So you would apply to us, and then we'd have a whole series of conversations, where like a conversation with you. And then we'd also be able to feed in your transcripts and everything else you do, and be able to come back to you and say, here's our suggested learning pathway for you. And does that feel right? Does this feel like, and you would say to us, well, not really, like, how'd you come up with this crazy idea? But the more we can do those students, the system will get smarter and smarter. So those are the places, some of the things we're trying to do right now. We have this project called prior learning assessments. So we think about all the learning you bring with you. And Google calls this project with us their PLA moonshot. PLA is prior learning assessment. So we're very excited about it.
It is exciting. I love this concept of precision education
Yeah.
before personal education or personal university. That's what we're having. So so many ideas. I could go on and on. I don't know if we have the time for another question or not. Zena?
Actually, very much fruitful. I actually have a question myself. So for the both of you, what do you think is the difference between equality and equity, not only in education in general, but higher education?
Person.
So equality is this notion of everyone gets the same chance. So if you imagine a 100-yard dash, we all get the same starting blocks. Equity recognizes that there are people who are already starting 50 yards behind. So if we think about race in the United States, for example, we know that structural racism means that students will come to us and because of inequities, will come to us with fewer resources, by and large, on average, than a more privileged white student. And so equity work really asks us to recognize the sort of structural differences and then to address those in some fashion. How do we, right? So I think that's the critical one. It took me a long time to really understand and learn and think about this. Let me give you an example. So in our dormitories, housing happens, so you get better and better housing options as you move through from freshman, second year, third year, fourth year. And we do it on a basis where, like, the apartments are what everybody wants. Like, those are most fair. Everyone wants to be in an apartment. And you bring 4 students together for an apartment. And then in the old method, we would take your GPA, your grade point average, and you would get preference based on a higher GPA. Then we recognized something. Our low-income students had to work while they were studying. They were in jobs. So we had a mother of an engineering student who said, my kid's working 30 hours a week as well as going to school full-time. Of course his GPA is lower. And now he also gets penalized because of that. He doesn't get as good housing. And I thought, you know, we never intended that to be the case, but we built in an inequity that didn't recognize the difference that that student was living with versus his peers. We were just thinking about it as grades, but it's like there's something else going on. So I think equity work forces you to dig under the surface and understand what are the things that people carry with them, what are the sort of things that hold them back, and how do you address that in a way that makes everything more fair? And of course, people of privilege hate this, right? Because they everyone who's successful likes to think it was all about them. We're all guilty of this. When in fact, there was a whole lot of other factors that went in. And we give up privilege very grudgingly, by and large. So equity work can be hard because you'll get a lot of internal resistance. So in America, we have, you have a national exam for university placement.
Yeah, to access
And I'm going to
university.
assume, maybe this is less true in Spain because the wealth inequities are bigger in America, that you have very good high schools and pretty mediocre high schools and maybe even some very poor high schools. So the kid who, by no choice of his or own, ends up in a poor high school because of his or her parents' wealth, has an inequitable situation going into that exam. Right? So that's not equal opportunity, that's an equitable opportunity. So these are the things that we have to address. Yeah. But when in Boston, which is a city near me, there are exam schools. The exam high schools are like, they are amazing high schools. You get in with an exam. And what we realize is that black kids in Boston were not getting in. So if you look at the proportion of the population, it's like, they are extremely underrepresented. What's going on here? Well, the white kids getting in had parents who had enough money and privilege to get them special tutoring, after-school programs, et cetera. Black kids didn't. So now the new superintendent said, we're going to change this. We're not going to use the exam the same way. We're going to adjust for neighborhood because we know where the poor kids are. It has been an absolute protest from the white parents, right? And what do they, because they see their kids' opportunity now being compromised. That's the problem, that's the challenge of equity work. And if you ask them, they would say, of course I'm not racist. They would say, no, I just want everyone, they have an equal chance, they take the same exam, but it's not equal if you're starting 50 yards behind in the 100-yard race.
So thank you both for having us here and answering the questions of the students, and just for being here in general. Thank you so much for discussing opportunity and equity in all levels of education. Mr. LeBlanc, we have actually a surprise for you before you leave from all the students.
Real shoes? I just realized I'm wearing sneakers. Like, maybe we should get real shoes.
They are not shoes, but you can wear it.
I'm teasing.
If you would do us the honor of wearing this sweatshirt.
Oh, I love it. Do you know about this? So
You don't need to wear it right now, but
oh, so happy.
we want to have your picture.
So my wife makes fun of me because every school I visit, I buy a hoodie.
Okay, well,
And
you
I
don't
have
to buy it
shelves
now.
of hoodies from every school where I've ever done a talk, et cetera. And I was hoping before I left that I would get one of these. So thank you. Like the perfect gift, as my family would attest.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you of everyone, and yeah,
Actually,
and in particular,
yes,
what?
just like a bag with all of the goodies from the university as
Oh, another from the global
God,
education,
thank
but that's
you.
for Paul.
And your
Okay,
wife
that's for-
to
yeah.
enjoy a variety of things.
once a year. just for this.
Yeah, just for the.
Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of everyone. Paul, it's been true inspiration, and I hope it's been true inspiration to the many future teachers. We have future educators here with us, and I hope they understand what's, I think, the most important, how much you care about your students.
It's the reason we do
And
the
I-
work.
But you do care, and
Yeah.
that's why you put them first. And I hope you do the same in your very long careers in the future. That's the one thing I hope you've learned.
Thank you so
very,
much.
thank you very much,
Thank
Paul.
you so
very
much for having me.
Thank you.
Sorry, look at the back of my head the whole time. It's a terrible angle.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're done.